high mountain, high mountain, high mountain. I'm trying my best, 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 trying to get.
All right. Thank you, Aretha. This is Stacey Keane. I'm a first-year Master of Divinity student, and we are welcoming you tonight. We are so glad you're here. Can people hear me? I hope.
Hear you.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Great. All right. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to Walking by Faith, the theological future of Black Lives Matter. It is an urgent and crucial topic that will remain so as we move forward in the months and the years to come. Our first song was offered as a medium to transition from your day to this space with the help of the one and only Aretha Franklin. This song was part of the 1972 album, Amazing Grace, that was filmed in a church in Los Angeles. It was part of the music documentary Amazing Grace, and that was put out 2 years ago. If you haven't seen that, do yourself a favor and try to catch that this holiday season. It's absolutely incredible. It's fantastic. And 2 years ago was the year she also passed away. In 2015, then President Barack Obama wrote the following regarding Franklin. Nobody embodies fully the connection between the African-American spiritual, the blues, R&B, rock and roll, the way hardship and sorrow were transformed into something full of beauty and vitality and hope. American history wells up when Aretha sings. This evening, we will focus on the point of intersection between Black Lives Matter and the church and theology. What can we learn from each other and these three fantastic local leaders in ministry? By being here, focusing our time, our energy, minds, and our hearts, we are joining into the larger conversation and movement towards seeking justice for Black people in this country and around the world. Our agenda is full, and John, thank you so much for putting that up. We are realistic about what we can fit into an hour. We will have an invitation, introductions of our panelists, focused questions and Q&A, and we will close at 8 with closing remarks and a closing song. We are so glad you are here. Next, I'd like to introduce my fellow colleague as a first-year Master of Divinity student, also Aderonke Lipede, who will lead us in an invocation and establish some context for the conversation this evening. And I would like to say that we had some challenges with the closed captioning. So I am going to be typing, so just bear with me while I do my best. So there may be some.
They actually got fixed amazingly, but thank you so much for.
It's working. That's American glorious. Okay, then I can rest my fingers. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Aderonke.
Welcome this evening. Could we bow our heads in prayer, please? Gracious and loving God and Creator, we are grateful that we can come tonight and bear witness to the connection between the movement of Black Lives Matter and theology. We pray that as we move through the night, that we will be able to lift up ideas, suggestions, and solutions as we build our society to be a more fair and just and equal society. We're thankful for the speakers tonight. We're thankful for everyone in the virtual space that has come to visit tonight to hear a word on this topic. This we ask in the precious name of the Creator. Amen. Well, tonight, as many of you know, that the Black Lives Matter movement was started in 2013. And it was started by three Black women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Kulas, and Opal Tometi. And it was created in response to the killing or the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2013. And this is an organic movement, and it wasn't started by a religious group. So the question becomes, what does theology have to say about Black Lives Matter, or how does the church respond to Black Lives Matter, or how do they participate? Martin Luther King said that the church must be the guide and the critic of the state and never its tool. If the church does not capture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. So in other words, the church must catch up. And so it is important to bear in mind that the Black Lives Matter began as a lament for the simple acknowledgement that the death of Black people at the hands of police is important. It is not normal. It deserves fair and open judicial inquiry. It is a lament that for 400 years, this country has deemed Black and brown life as less valuable than its white counterpart. It has been viewed as less than human, or that 3/5 of a white person, as was put in the Constitution. And so the Black Lives Matter, what we're trying to address is real. As you can see in this slide, that 2,204 Black men and women were killed between 2013 and 2020. The realness of the pain that's inflicted by discrimination against Black and brown lives is also depicted in our next slide, in which, if we could go to the next slide, in which we can see here in our very fair city of Boston that Blacks have a median net worth of only $8, and the 8 is not a typo, compared to 247,500 for white people. So we can see that Black Lives Matter, it's not just related to criminal justice, that it also impacts access to economic wealth. In our next slide, we can also, this is based upon a study from Harvard Law School that was released in September of this year. And we can see here that Blacks and Latinx people in Massachusetts receive longer prison sentences than their white counterparts. And in the next slide, we can also see that even when they're charged with the same offenses, that Blacks and Latinos are more likely to be incarcerated, and they receive longer sentences than their white counterparts. We can also see in the next slide that it shows that the Black leaders in Massachusetts have been calling on the governor to pass legislation. It is now in the hands of the governor, and he is not even being transparent about how he's going to address this bill. And finally, Black Lives Matter also encompasses the health disparities. In this slide, we can see that Hispanics are more likely to contract COVID-19, whereas Black and African American people are more likely to die from this disease. And if you will look at the numbers, 171, 154, Black people in Massachusetts only comprise 8% of the population, and Latinos only comprise 12%. So those numbers are staggering given the small populations within this state. So as we begin to discuss the issues of Black Lives Matter, we must bear in mind that there's real pain and real suffering that we're trying to address. This is not just a theoretical exercise, that we must continue this work. And with that, I turn the program over to my esteemed colleague, who is a first-year MDiv student, Omari Aarons.
Thank you so much, Aderonke, and welcome everyone. I'm so excited to co-moderate this conversation with Fran Graveson. And so we'll be leading this together with our three esteemed panelists. Really need no introduction because they are familiar to us all, but we are excited to welcome Reverend Robin Bartlett, who is the senior pastor of First Church in Sterling, Massachusetts, and a proud STH alum. Reverend Kenneth Young, pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and director of external relationship for the Massachusetts Council of Churches, and the Reverend Mariama White-Hammond, also a proud graduate of STH and the founding pastor of New Roots AME Church in Dorchester, Massachusetts. We're excited to have all three of you with us. Fran and I are going to get started with asking a couple of questions that we've prepared for the panelists, and we'll invite you to drop some questions that you might have in the chat, and we'll do our best to incorporate them in the conversation. We'd also ask that if you are not speaking, that you keep yourself on mute, as we can hear a little bit of background noise as we're going. Reverend Kenneth, if I can start with you on our first question. As we were thinking about this year and all the situation that we had around our national election, one of the questions that's come up is this outcome of the election a referendum on Black Lives Matter? With Biden's win over Trump, did the movement win? And how do we reckon with 70 million people who would argue, some would argue, voted for white supremacy and racism, misogyny, and sexism? I'll turn it over to you for your first answer.
Are we good now? Can you hear me?
We're good.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad to share with you. I think your question is very poignant and vital to this conversation. I can recall having this conversation with some colleagues of mine and saying, what actually happened after the election was finally called. We've seen Black Lives Matters signs in a lot of our neighborhoods, and in neighborhoods that I personally did not expect them in. And so it's just interesting because when we seen those signs, did those signs actually translate to votes at the ballot? And then I think the other question that we have to ask is who we were actually voting for, or what was on the ballot. We had two older white men, and we can talk about white male privilege, but at the end of the day, we still had two older white males over 70 who's vying for the seat of power, to be the most powerful white man in the world. And that says a lot. If we want to look at the Black Lives Matters movement, more than anything, I think we're seeing that people are trying, at least I believe the movement is trying to deconstruct a power system that has held Black folks down for over 400 years. And so either way it goes, to me personally, I think, the movement itself is trying to not succumb to a system that is very powerful and strong. And even if Democrats won, in which we're now saying that they won, Biden, Harris, great. Trump, Pence, whatever, we're still seeing the fact that there's a system that's in place that is going to try its best to hold Black people down. And so the 70 million that voted for Trump, we can say, hey, you know, you all are really white supremacists. Or we can also ask the question of those white folks that voted for a white male and did not vote for a Black female in Kamala Harris to be a president. But she was good enough to be a vice president, good enough to assist the white male. I think we have to really look at that and really and hone in on what is actually going on. We're good enough to assist the white male, but we're not good enough to actually lead this country. And so I think the win for the Black Lives Matter movement would have been if we could have actually got a Black person as the head, and that hasn't happened yet. And so I think there's a struggle for us to go in order for this actually, the system actually to be deconstructed. I think that's what we're really fighting for. At least that's what I see in the Black Lives Matter movement.
Thank you so much for that. Reverend Mariama, if I can come to you next and then ask Reverend Robin to conclude us on this question, and we'll move forward. Was the outcome of our national election a referendum on Black Lives Matter?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that, so I wanna mention, yes, I am a pastor in Dorchester. I have been a racial justice advocate for as long as I can remember. I also, in the last year, have become a farmer in New Hampshire. And with 9 other friends, we have a Black-owned farm in Loudon, New Hampshire, which is about 15 to 20 minutes outside of Concord, and it is about as red as can be. There was one Biden sign in our neighborhood, and everybody else was Trump Pence. And what I've learned in being in dialogue with folks, because I have to buy my seed, I have to get my fertilizer, I have to move the things that it takes to farm, and that means I have to be in conversation with my neighbors. And I think if you want to understand why 70 million folks voted for Trump, what I would say is most of them would not say, and I think honestly do not think they voted for white supremacy. They voted against something that they believe that Biden represents and that Black Lives Matter is connected to. And for that crew of folks that I've had the opportunity to be in conversation with, and they are tough conversations. Like, I have done a lot of work not to be triggered by everything, because 10 years ago, I don't even think I could have made it through like 30 seconds of the conversation. But the reality is, for the folks that I've been in conversation with, their understanding of the vision that Black Lives Matter offers doesn't include them. And so what they voted against is their belief that there are, and I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying, if you want to understand where people are, you got to hear them on their own terms. I think they voted against a vision that they think of America, that they think they will not fit in, that there is no space for them in. And I want to push back, because I think if we're not careful and we have very sort of simplistic ways of understanding folks, then we can be reductionist, and then we have no opportunity to have conversation or really push ourselves. I'm not saying I agree. I mean, in these conversations, I hear about 10 triggering things in like 8 minutes before we can get to the deeper stuff. I had somebody tell me that we're talking about garlic seed and that COVID was going to be over after the election because it was all a ploy to get Trump out. That's hard to hear, because that's not how I feel or see it. But I think if we want to have a conversation about where this country is, and I think this country is in a dangerous position for a civil war, then we have to have a more nuanced understanding of who those folks are, what they voted for, and then this question about what is the vision, and how do are we planning to have a country where all of us can still be in it? And what is the vision that would allow that to happen?
Awesome. Reverend Robin Bartlett.
So I'm answering if I think that this was, that the election was a referendum on Trumpism, and is that right? Is that a good way to sum up the question? Like my esteemed panelist, Reverend Mariama, I'm actually from Concord, New Hampshire, so I know Loudon well. And I now live in Trump country, Massachusetts. I've lived in Massachusetts for my entire adult life, and I moved to Sterling, Massachusetts, which was a small town in central Massachusetts, after living in Boston for 17 years. And I'm in my 7th year here serving as a senior pastor at the First Church in Sterling. This is a small town, and it is a town where Trump won the election in 2016. Interestingly, in 2020, he lost here in Sterling. So he won. Isn't that amazing? I don't think it's a referendum, by the way, though. I'm just going to say, but he lost by 200 votes this year. And in 2016, he won, but just, again, by 200 votes. So I think, new people moved here or something and switched, we sort of went more purple. This is a red town, a farm town. I have very similar experiences talking to people that Reverend Mariama does, except that I am a white person talking to other white people. I do not think that this election was a referendum on Trumpism, because 71 million people came out to vote for Trump very enthusiastically. And what I've found over the last 4 years being here is that while the things have shifted, the right here has gotten far more angry, vicious, and terrifying, to be really honest. I will talk about this more later, my own experiences, but I've received threats in the last year for my support of Black Lives Matter from people in my community, online and in person. So I watched for the last 4 years things really escalate. So Trump lost the election. I think there are fewer people that voted for Trump, but the people who did vote for Trump have gotten angrier and more dangerous. And that's what I've seen, even in my little town. So this is a town in which there are very few Black Lives Matter signs, but there are lots of "We Love Our Sterling Police" signs. And what I find talking to the folks here, and hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about this more when I answer another question, but what I find when I talk to the folks here a lot is that they see Black Lives Matter, the movement, as pitted against their beloved police. And they there's this culture of just worshiping police officers in these small towns out here. And I don't know I have lots of thoughts about what that's about. I think that in addition to people not seeing their way of life reflected in the Black Lives Matter movement, they also see it as an anti-police, anti-America, violent movement. And also they refuse to acknowledge their own violent rhetoric and their own violence. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Robin. It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
And we will have an opportunity for you to check in again with their experiences. Hi, I'm Fran Graveson, and we have our next question going to Reverend Kenneth. And we'll do a series of questions now in which we'll just have one panelist answer the question, and then we'll finish again with all with people responding to a joint question. So this one to Kenneth. Reverend Kevin, I didn't get to say hi to you earlier, so I'm so happy to have you here. The question we have today is, President-elect Biden has called for unity in our nation. And we heard in the first comments also that we all understand that to have unity, we need to make significant steps towards racial reconciliation. Specifically, when we are faith leaders in our communities, what is our role, our responsibility to helping our communities move forward in that racial reconciliation? Thanks.
Thank you, Fran, Ms. Graveson. I think this is a very interesting question because America likes to move forward. We like to move quickly through things. You know, we think about the children that were separated at the line in Mexico, and the next thing you know, you don't even hear anything else about it. And to be honest, even with George Floyd, it's kind of stale now. Ahmaud Arbery is kind of stale now. Botham Jean is kind of stale, like we don't even really talk about it. And so I'm saying all that to say, before we move to reconciliation, I think America has to at least lament for the countless lives that we've lost. And lament means that we have to stay in it for a while, right? When we look at the Old Testament, when we talk about them sitting in sackcloth and ashes, I mean, they really would sit in the mess. And I don't think we do that well. And that's just people outside of the church. People inside the church, they don't do that well either, right? And so when we talk about the American church, at least that's like the way I like to describe it, the American church hasn't done it. It's not doing it now. And I'm not sure if it will ever do it. But what the American church wants to do is to destroy this story, or at least sweep this story under the rug so we can move forward. Like, we want to just move forward. And I think that's the biggest issue. You cannot reconcile anything if you're not willing to talk about it. To me, I think the American church needs to go to counseling. And at least for Black folks in America, it's almost as if we have been married to an abuser. And as a pastor, I would say, you know, you need to do your best to get out. But we are so in love with this dream, it seems as if we keep going back and we keep getting abused. And so I think both parties need to go to counseling in order to be healed, in order to be made whole. And then we can get to this point of reconciliation. Because the truth of the matter is, as faith leaders, we don't sit at the table with people a lot of the times, just being honest. We don't sit at the table with people we don't agree with. We don't sit at the table we disagree with people. Like, we have, you know, your left, liberal leaning folks, and then, you know, the conservative folks. We're not even going to talk to them, but they are actually leading families. They're actually leading communities. And that's how you end up with a church that does not know how to worship after the election. That's how we end up with pastors who are kneeling down saying, God, how can you allow this to happen? How can you allow one person who says that they don't love the Lord, and then another person said they love the Lord? Like, if you actually are looking at both sides, evangelicals and main lines, let's just say that, we're looking at a split, and we both parties say we love Jesus. And so until we're able to reconcile that, this sense of love, because love is the main thing for both sides of the church, but we describe it very differently. It is put into action in different ways. But until we can actually sit down and have those conversations, I don't think there's no reconciliation, right? And the other R word I think we actually have to talk about before we get to reconciliation, that's reparations. And I know we probably don't have time to talk about that, but when you strip people down for over 400 years, you need to repair that in order for us to be reconciled. Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil, who kind of leads in this area, she kind of talks about this in the sense of, we were talking about reconciliation. It means that you want to bring the relationship back to a place that it was better before anything happened. And I'm not sure if America is ready for that. I'm not even sure if the American church is ready to have a conversation like that.
As you were talking, Reverend Mariama put in the chat, we have to have a reckoning before we can have a reconciliation. So we're continuing to throw out these R words during the course of this program. Reverend Robin, I'll come to you with this next question. And as you alluded to in your opening comments, the election and really the last 4 years have sparked a number of conversations globally about the moral center of our nation. What does the win mean regarding changing hearts and minds? How do we change people's hearts and minds? And are there ways that our churches can use this moment to better advocate for Black lives?
Yeah. The Reverend Dr. William Barber says that we need a moral Pentecost. And I've been spending the last 4 years trying to learn how to speak a new language, a language that hopefully connects people across ideological difference to love. I serve a purple congregation, and I didn't know that actually until I got here and stepped in it while I was preaching. I came here right after Ferguson, and I preached a sermon. I don't know, it was like my 4th month here. I didn't know what I was doing. I was new to ministry too. I preached a sermon asking, when did Mike Brown stop being somebody's baby? When did Jesus stop being somebody's baby? It was actually during Advent. I was like, make his path straight. I was, whatever. And I thought it was a balls to the wall sermon. I was so proud of it. I think my congregation looked very shell-shocked, but I didn't mind. Afterward, I had a conversation with this family who I had grown to love already. It was like my favorite family right away. And they wanted to come and talk to me. And they came to talk to me because their son, who's a police officer, told them that he didn't want them to come to my church anymore because I was anti-police. And so I sat down and had this conversation with them that was hard. It was very healing. We talked about what it feels like for a mama of a police officer to let her son leave and not know whether he's going to come back. And we talked about how Mike Brown's mom felt every time he left the house. And actually was this beautiful conversation where we both reached this new understanding about each other and about this movement. And we hugged, and it was great. And they left the room, and I burst into tears, and I wrote a message to my colleagues, and I said, I don't belong here. And my colleague, I'll never forget this, called me immediately. They knew I was new. She called me up and she said, Robin, you're not supposed to belong there. That's not your job. You can't do ministry in a place where you belong. You can't do good ministry in a place where everybody already agrees with you. You can't do ministry in an echo chamber. And so I have never forgotten that conversation, and I took it to heart. And every single day after that meeting, and then after Trump was elected, after Trump was elected in 2016, we have spent all of that time trying to have hard conversations across ideological difference. So in 2016, that same year, we had conversations on race where we invited our entire police force. They all came. There were 100 people at it, which just the fact that 100 people came was a win. In and of itself. It was very difficult, and I don't even think it went very well. But I think the only way to get to where we need to be in this country and to have this win that Biden just had mean anything, we have to continue to try to have conversations with people who disagree with us, understanding God to be love, and that all of us are on a path to return to the heart of God. I think my time is probably up.
Yeah, Reverend Robin, that's such a great lead-in, actually, to a question that we wanted to bring to Reverend Mariama. This next question, when we look at the racial demographics of our neighborhoods, churches, and our K through 12 schools, we live, worship, and learn separately. That doesn't lend itself to building empathy and understanding. There are faith leaders who don't know, and yet people are looking to them for answers. How do we create spaces where it's okay to not know? Judgment-free spaces for faith leaders by faith leaders. And how do we balance that with holding people accountable for understanding their own privilege in not knowing? And this question again is for Reverend Mariama.
Yeah, I mean, I think I looked at that and I struggled because first, faith leaders have to actually want to ask that question in a space. And I'm not exactly convinced that they do. So I am a Black woman church planter, which makes me like basically a unicorn. And I tried to find church plant networks where I could be asking the questions that I'm struggling with, and they just weren't even there. And I finally called a colleague who sort of studies and like moves in all these church networks. And I said, look, like I know as a pastor, I should be in community with people, you know, that I can talk to and work these things out with. And where can I go? And he was like, honestly, I moved through all these networks. There's no place you're gonna go where people are asking the questions that you're asking. And so I think those spaces could come to be if people were diligently desiring to go there. I do think it's also worth noting that Black Lives Matter was 2 out of the 3 of the Black women are queer women. So when we ask why Black Lives Matter didn't happen within the Black church, that's mostly why. All of those women have relationships with the Black church. They had connections in their childhood with the Black church, and ain't none of them still in there. And I don't think it's just because they've actively chosen to leave. I think they realized there was not a place for them to be their full selves and be in there. I lead a multiracial, LGBT affirming congregation, and we are a unicorn. Like I have 2 other pastors, one in DC and one in Greensboro, both Black pastors, where we have growing white congregations. Our Black folks are hanging on by a thread. It's about 40-40 Black, white in my congregation and 20% non-Black people of color. We're a unicorn. A multiracial church in the United States is considered where one group is not more than 80%. And the reason that bar is so low is because if you didn't put it at 80%, you would have no multiracial churches. There wouldn't be anyone to study or look at or even think about. So I think much love, and I'm not hating on pastors. I'm sure there are ones out there who really care about it. Maybe their congregations are not there, but as someone who's actually living and doing that, I don't know other people who want to even be in conversation with us. You know, I don't know of many Black churches. There's like 3 of us that I know of in the entire Boston area, the LGBT affirming Black, rooted churches. People don't want to have that conversation. Now, all of those people know me, so they let me go because they know I've been there since I was a little girl. But you know, I won't say what meeting it is, but every once in a while I gotta say something, and then it's like, oh, she's gonna bring up the LGBT question again. Like, we are not usually interested in going there. And it's not just white pastors. I'm telling you, Black male pastors who have called me by my first name from their pulpits while adding doctorates to people who don't have them, don't want to talk about gender. Like, we are not really great about going there with the hard issues. Clergy spaces are performative most of the time. I would be glad to be in a clergy space that just wasn't performative. If somebody knows, put it in the chat, I will show up to it. But until we have spaces where we're opening up and being honest with each other about a wide range of issues, you know, race not being one of the tougher ones, but there's some even lighter issues we aren't even ready to deal with. So, you know, I'm sad to say that. I love my people. I'm not leaving the church altogether. I am an AME, although people are like, how can you when your people don't know the doxology? But, you know, I just am not sure that we really want to go there. And that's Black churches too. I've had people tell me, I come here, I work with white people all day. I don't come here to also struggle with white people at church. Right? Like, I mean, on many sides, I don't think we want to go there.
Well, you know what? Thank you for speaking the truth, because this is why we're having this discussion today, is that we wanted to really get to what was true. And as usual, you laid it out there. So thank you so much. As always, we're pressed for time. So this is our last question that we'll ask all three of you. Our goal is to do this in 8 minutes. So we'll see how this goes. Our question, and I think we'll start, Reverend Robin, if I can come to you, Reverend Mariama, and then Reverend Kenneth. And Reverend Mariama, you actually just brought up the intersectional identity in the creators of the Black Lives Matter movement as Black queer women. So Patrisse Cullors, who is representing the Black Lives Matter Global Network, recently wrote a letter to the Biden-Harris administration, and I'll drop the link in the chat in just a moment, to put the movement's demands really front and center on their radar. And it brings us back to the core points of the Black Lives Matter movement, which started around police reform. As leaders in the faith community, what should our response be to the movement's call to action and demands for a voice in policy? And as Aderonke opened us with, there's a bill that's sitting on the governor's desk and in our state house that could use some action. Should church communities be actively involved in issues such as police reform, combating anti-Black violence, building political power, encouraging economic reparations, which Reverend Kenneth started us off with earlier? So Reverend Robin, 2 minutes, if I can turn to you first to give us a short answer to that amazingly complicated question.
Yeah, I actually think that that's a really important role for small town pastors, which I happen to be. A couple of years ago, the Massachusetts State Police Wives Association put Blue Lives Matter ribbons all on our town common, which the church happens to own. And I had to call and ask them to take it down, which made the police chief very angry with me. And afterwards, I had to develop a relationship with him that was one of trust and affection, which was not easy to do. We have very different political ideologies, but because I have forged a relationship with him that is really very close, partly because I'm the fire chaplain as well, and I've gone with him on tough calls. And because we've shared heartbreaking moments together, we've actually developed a relationship that is really good. And because of that, I've been able to, for instance, reach out to him after I preach a sermon that might get back to him, or to ask. I recently asked him what he thought about 8 Can't Wait, and got his honest answer. I don't always agree with him, but the fact that he's willing to talk to me is really important in sort of moving forward, because I do think that my role as the pastor is the town pastor and a town leader is to engage with the police around some of these issues. I realize that's a lot easier for me as a white woman, but I am determined to use that privilege to make a change in my community.
Thank you so much for that. I think Reverend Mariama, did I say we were coming to you next?
I think you did. So I kind of think this is a throw. Of course, I believe we should be engaged. And while we're at it, since I've been on the coordinating committee of folks pushing on this bill, I put a website link in the chat that you can go look at. It's a press conference that we did this morning with not just Black pastors. We had other folks involved, but you know, we had a good showing. I was the coordinator for it, and it was important to me, for instance, that our voices be balanced by gender, which we did. And I'm trying to put the phone script in here, but it's not really letting me. So we'll figure that out. But yeah, I definitely think police brutality affects my people. So I'm called to speak about it. For me, you know, there are definitely people, I have heard, particularly from white colleagues, who are like, it's controversial to talk about these issues. I'm just gonna keep it real. In my tradition, it's not. Like, it's not controversial. It's just about a matter of dedicating the time. My church is in in Dorchester, over policing, the court, there's so much going on. So, you know, for me, it would be irresponsible, given my community, not to be talking about these issues. But I understand that is a different dynamic than others might be experiencing.
Thank you for that. And Reverend Kenneth, we will give you the last word as we wrap up this portion of our program. Take it right there.
Well, I would say this has been a blessing for me to be in conversation with everyone. To your point, I want to kind of touch on the whole Black church experience, which I think we haven't really talked about a whole lot, right? Black churches are having issues with Black Lives Matters. And I think we, you know, kind of talked about it a little bit, but I think the real issue that we are seeing is that the Black church in itself has lost its prophetic voice. It has gone hoarse. And so since it's gone hoarse, we've had grassroots to take the moniker, to continue to go on. They are the ones who are out in the streets, and they're leading movements. And, you know, even in Massachusetts, and I kind of laugh with my colleague and executive director of Massachusetts Council of Churches, and I said, you know, the pastors got together and they did a protest, and they had like 300 or 400 people. And then a grassroots organizer had thousands of people. I think it says a lot about how people view the church, and where, in particular, if the Black church is going to be the Black church of old, right? We like to hold on to all the prophetic voices of Martin Luther King and all these other, you know, others that we love to name. If we're going to be that, then we have to reclaim that space. I'm not sure if we want to do that, because as Reverend Mariama said, we love to perform. And so I think what people are seeing is that we're tired of your song and dance. We actually want you to do something in our communities. And that means you got to get your hands dirty. That means you got to get out there and do something. And so I think more than anything else, I think when we look at the Black Lives Matters movement, we have to learn how to work with outside organizations. It means that we now have to learn how to collaborate with people. And once again, it means that we may not agree with the ideology of the entire organization, but if the core is right and we're talking about humanity, I don't care your own personal relationships. I don't care anything about that. We're talking about humanity. And I leave this. I think when we look at Black Lives Matters, I think it's a catchy for white liberals to hold on to now. I think Dr. Eddie Glaude talks about how Black lives should be valued, and Black lives are not valued. I don't care what list you want to go down, whether it's income equality, education inequality, wage gaps. We can name all of the stuff that we've been talking about. COVID has, you know, shown us a lot. But our lives are not valued. And so that's the reason why we can have people who are shot in the street and no one really does anything, or we don't have any faith in our system. That's the reason why, to be honest with you all here, I don't really have faith in the governor signing this bill. I hope that he does, but if he doesn't, my world would not crash, because that's the way the system has been working. It has been working against people of color for over 400 years. So I hope that I think the church has to come together, and it has to reclaim that voice and that power to push this bill like Reverend Mariama and others are doing today, in order for the governor and other people in seats of power to see that the church actually has power again.
Thank you, Reverend Kenneth. Thank you, everyone, tonight. This has been a fabulous conversation. We appreciate all of our panelists joining us tonight. We're going to move on right now to the Reverend Dr. Jay Williams, who is the professor of our Black Lives Matter and Theology class, and hear a few words from him.
So I want to first say thank you to Deans Moore and Stone and Hickman Maynard for the vision to add this course to the curriculum at BU this fall. Thanksgiving to all of the students in our class, particularly to those who planned and presented this conversation: Omari, Fran, and John, and Aderonke, and Elizabeth, and Stacey, and John. Thanks to Reverend Robin, and Reverend Ken, and Reverend Mariama. I think, right, three things jump out for sure of the myriad of things you said. Reverend Robin, this idea that the worship of police needs to be confronted. Reverend Ken, that there must be lament before we attempt as a nation to move forward. And then Reverend Mariama, this idea that before there can be any reconciliation, right, there needs to be a reckoning, a confrontation. These three kind of theological nuggets that you lift up, I think will give us even more to consider, right, about this intersection between what's happening in the streets and what happens in the tradition of thinking about ultimate reality in view of God. And I just want to say briefly, because I know we're short on time, and it's appropriate in some way that we're short on time because we've been on a journey, but in reality, we're just beginning, right? As the forum comes to an end, as our class comes to an end, we have to just remember, right, that we are just in many ways setting out. A lot has happened, still a long, long way to go. So, right, Ezra and Nehemiah are one of my favorite kind of texts from scripture, and they have this idea of, right, making a beginning. We must make our start because our lives, all of them depend upon it, right? As I said on Tuesday in our class, we know that Black lives matter to God. The question before us is whether they matter to one another. And if they don't matter or are valued enough, then our work is actually just beginning. So gratitude, I'll turn it back over to the students. Thank you. And let's continue to attempt to make a difference in our BU community in Boston and beyond. Thanks.
And I believe, yep, Elizabeth Foster.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. J, for coming up with this class and this program and encouraging us to do this. Thank you to all of the panelists again for, I think we have a thank you slide that hopefully someone's gonna put up for us as well. Thank you so much to our co-sponsors, who are the Cross Disability Club, the community, UU Community of Learning, and the Association of Black Seminarians. Special thanks, as always, to everything at SEH, to Valentina Pride, who helped us set up the calendar invite and really just helps us set up everything at the school. Yes, and thanks again to Robin and Kenneth and Mariama for agreeing to be with us here tonight and for this wonderful conversation. And I want to thank all the folks in our group for committing to doing all the planning for this, and to all of you for coming to join us tonight and embarking on this dialogue with us. We are so glad you're here.
All right, so we are going to end kind of as we began, with some music. And as we began and ended most classes with Dr. J, we want to just use it as a moment to celebrate the beauty and the joy out of Black culture as well. So we're going to close this evening with John Legend, a song entitled Never Break. It's from the album Bigger Love that was released in June of just this year. I heard him sing this song just this weekend on the New Yorker Radio Hour, and I felt moved. I felt like it was a good one to include. And I'm gonna let this song speak for itself, but again, we're just so grateful to have this time together. And at the end of this song, we will close the program and yet continue our journey together onward.
Can I just add one thing before we move on to the song? I just wanted to add that there's a survey that we're sharing the link to in the chat, that we would love it if you would have a chance to take our survey. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was on me. I completely forgot to tell everyone about the survey. Please take our survey.
John, I don't think the sound is coming through.
We got one way to get love. Ain't no place but all. Nothing can stop this. No one can stop us. We gotta be the love. I don't wanna think about nothing. The world feels like it's crumbling. Every day another new something. But in the end, can't nobody do us in. I just wanna think about loving. Won't ever give it up. We got one way to get love. Ain't no place but us. Nothing can stop this. No one can stop us. We got won't ever give it up. We got a one-way ticket love. Place it up. Nothing can stop it. No one can stop us. We gotta be
Actually,
we got a one-way ticket love. Ain't no place. Nothing can stop us. No one can stop us. We Shall I put her in snow mode?
Nope.
How about I'll